Sometimes, when the wind blows just right, carrying the scent of pine and fresh snow down from the Rockies, I find a kind of peace I never thought possible again. I'm sitting on my small porch, a chipped enamel mug cradled in my hands, watching the sun set over the foothills west of Denver. It's quiet now. The hum of the city is distant, a low thrum that means life continues, but it doesn't demand anything from me. This quiet, this stillness, it's a hard-won victory. Because for a long time, the world was a screaming vortex, and I was drowning right in the middle of it. The year before last? That was the year I died, metaphorically speaking, and then had to crawl back out of the grave, piece by painful piece. It was the worst year of my life, a crucible that burned away everything I thought I knew about myself, about love, about integrity. Before all that, before Veronica, my life was, well, simple, and I was content. I made a decent living, about $85,000 a year, as an environmental engineer. Not flashy money, but enough to pay the bills, put a little into savings, and keep my 2017 Subaru Forester running smoothly. My apartment, a modest two-bedroom in a quiet neighborhood, was filled with books, maps, and the faint smell of coffee and ozone from my air purifier. I spent my days poring over hydrological models, analyzing soil samples, and advocating for clean water. It wasn't glamorous, but it was honest work. It felt important. I was Aaron Keller, 40 years old, and my biggest worry was usually whether a remediation project would stay on budget or if I'd get enough time in the field. I was proud of my work, particularly the South Platte River Purification Initiative, a project that had taken years but brought clean drinking water to thousands. My reputation was solid, built on data and diligence. I was a man of science, a man of facts. And then Veronica Thorne walked into my life, and facts became the first casualty. I met Veronica at a charity gala, one of those events I usually avoided but was roped into by a colleague. She was stunning, a force of nature in a red dress, moving through the room with an almost predatory grace. She was a real estate developer, she told me, with a smile that could melt glaciers and eyes that promised the world. She talked about big visions, transforming cityscapes, leaving a legacy. I, in my slightly too tight suit, talked about water purity and sustainable infrastructure. I expected her to glaze over, but she listened, genuinely, or so it seemed. She asked intelligent questions, made me feel seen, heard, interesting. Our first few dates were a whirlwind. She was smart, witty, confident, and dangerously charming. I was utterly smitten. It felt like something out of a movie, the principled scientist falling for the glamorous entrepreneur. I didn't see the tiny cracks, the subtle shifts in conversation. She'd laugh, a light, tinkling sound, when I talked about my work, saying something like, "Oh, Aaron, you and your little water samples. So pure, so noble." It felt affectionate at first, a playful tease. But then it became more pointed. We'd be at a swanky restaurant she'd chosen, one where the valet had snickered at my Forester, and she'd introduce me to her friends, usually venture capitalists or other developers, with a practiced line. "This is Aaron, my environmentalist. He saves the world, one contaminated puddle at a time." A joke, right? But the way she'd say it, with a dismissive wave of her hand, and the way her friends would offer polite, slightly condescending smiles, it gnawed at me. She'd talk about ambition, about making a real mark, and I knew she wasn't talking about my kind of mark. She'd tell me I was too soft, too idealistic, that I needed to think bigger. I wanted to believe she meant well, that she just saw potential in me that I didn't. I was blind, deaf, and dumb, utterly consumed by the idea of us. The pressure started subtly, then became an undeniable torrent. Veronica wanted a bigger life, a faster life. Our small apartment became charming, then quaint, then a little cramped. Don't you think, for a power couple like us? She started hinting at a new place, a sprawling modern marvel with views of the entire city. I showed her my savings, explained my budget. "Aaron," she'd say, her voice laced with exasperation, "money is just a tool. You have to command it, not let it command you." She made me feel like my financial prudence was a character flaw. Dinners with her developer friends became agonizing rituals of public humiliation. I remember one evening vividly, at a penthouse party overlooking the city. Veronica, resplendent in a sapphire gown, was holding court. She was discussing her latest project, a massive luxury condo development in a rapidly gentrifying part of town. When someone asked about the environmental impact, Veronica turned to me, a sweet, saccharine smile pasted on her face. "Oh, Aaron can tell you all about that. He's our resident water guru." Though, she chuckled, squeezing my arm a little too tightly. "He'd probably prefer we just leave the whole lot as a nature preserve. Wouldn't you, darling?" Her friends laughed, a chorus of expensive, well-oiled mirth. My face burned. I tried to explain the complexities of urban runoff and soil remediation, but she cut me off, her voice smooth as silk. "See? This is why Aaron and I balance each other. I dream big, he worries about the nitrates. It's adorable, really." The word adorable felt like a slap. I felt small, irrelevant, my life's work reduced to a charming eccentricity, a pet project for an overly earnest scientist. I started to dread these events, the feeling of my skin crawling, my pulse thrumming with a mixture of anger and shame. I started to wonder if I was just some naive idealist, holding myself back. Maybe she was right. Maybe I needed to be more ambitious, more ruthless, more like her. The thought terrified me, even as a part of me desperately wanted to prove I could be worthy of her world. The real knife twist came when her luxury condo project began to take shape. I had independently reviewed some of the public environmental impact reports for the area, just out of professional curiosity. The site, she'd boasted, was prime real estate, acquired through a series of ingenious land swaps. But something didn't sit right with me. The report seemed too clean. So, being me, I took a few discrete samples from the periphery of the site, a habit I'd never been able to break. What I found made my stomach drop. There were definite signs of groundwater contamination, specific heavy metals, and petroleum byproducts, consistent with a long-abandoned industrial use that hadn't been properly remediated. This wasn't minor. This was a public health nightmare waiting to happen, especially with the high-density residential development she was planning. I confronted her, gently at first. I showed her my preliminary findings, tried to explain the severity. Her reaction was swift and chilling. She didn't look at the data. She looked at me, her eyes narrowed to slits. "Are you out of your mind, Aaron?" she hissed, her voice low and dangerous. "This is my project. My legacy. Are you trying to sabotage me?" I tried to reason with her, to explain that we could find a solution, that the site needed proper remediation before building. She laughed, a harsh, humorless sound. "Solution? The solution is you forgetting you ever saw these samples. You're obsessed. You're jealous of my success. You're always looking for problems, aren't you? Can't you just be happy for me?" She spun a tale of me being a bitter, resentful man, trying to tear down her accomplishments. She twisted my professional integrity into an accusation of personal malice. It was gaslighting on a scale I hadn't imagined possible. I walked away from that conversation feeling like I'd lost my grip on reality. Had I imagined it? Was I projecting my own insecurities onto her project? The cognitive dissonance was immense, a painful tug-of-war between the objective data in my hand and the subjective, venomous accusations pouring from the woman I loved. Then the whispers started. First, a colleague asking if I was doing okay, looking at me with pity. Then, a subtle shift in how my supervisors interacted with me. Fewer projects. Less trust. Finally, the hammer dropped. My funding for a critical research grant was inexplicably pulled. Then came the phone call from the city's ethics committee, informing me of a formal inquiry into my handling of the South Platte River Purification Initiative, the very project I was most proud of. Someone had submitted a detailed, damning report alleging negligence, falsified data, and even outright fraud on my part. The accusations were wild, fabricated, designed to cripple my professional standing. They had manufactured emails, distorted project logs, even found a few disgruntled former interns to give testimonies that suggested I cut corners. It was a perfectly executed smear campaign, a weaponized narrative designed to destroy my reputation and, by extension, my ability to speak out about anything. I was numb, ostracized. My phone stopped ringing. Invitations to conferences vanished. My professional network, built over 2 decades, evaporated like morning mist. I felt like a ghost haunting my own life. My identity as Dr. Aaron Keller, principled environmental engineer, shredded beyond recognition. I was drowning in a sea of fabricated evidence, desperate to prove my innocence, but unable to grasp how to fight back against something so insidious and comprehensive. My mind, usually so clear and analytical, was a frantic mess of anxiety and despair. I barely ate, barely slept. My apartment became a tomb. But then, one night, staring at a printout of the fabricated evidence against me, something shifted. A cold fury, slow and steady, began to replace the despair. This wasn't some minor professional setback. This was a direct, targeted assassination of my career, my integrity, my entire life. And it was happening right as Veronica's contaminated project was speeding towards groundbreaking. The connection, once obscured by my emotional turmoil, was now stark, undeniable. She wasn't just gaslighting me about her site. She was actively destroying me to silence me. The negligence reports were too perfectly timed, too precisely aimed at my credibility. She wasn't just a manipulator, she was a predator. I stopped being a victim and started being a scientist again. A detective, if you will. My skills weren't just about water quality. They were about meticulous data analysis, identifying anomalies, tracing causation. I started by dismantling the fabricated evidence against me. The emails, for instance. The timestamps were off, slightly, by a few minutes or hours across different servers, hinting at manual manipulation. They falsified data, samples supposedly from the South Platte project. I had kept every original raw data file, every lab report, every chain of custody form for that entire project. It was a digital fortress of truth. I cross-referenced the manufactured reports with my own immutable logs, finding discrepancies that screamed forgery. I spent weeks, working from my apartment, ignoring the outside world, my Forester now parked gathering dust. I became intimately familiar with metadata, IP addresses, and digital forensics. I found patterns in the dissemination of the smear reports, tracing them through layers of burner email accounts and anonymous VPNs, until I saw the faint, almost imperceptible digital breadcrumbs leading back to an obscure PR firm that specialized in reputation management for politically connected individuals. A firm I knew Veronica had used before. The true moment of awakening came when I realized the precision with which her team had created these false documents. They knew my processes, my project structure, my team. Someone close to me, or someone with intimate knowledge of my work, had to have helped them. And then it hit me. Veronica had had full access to my home office, my files, my laptop, my life. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the Denver altitude. She hadn't just orchestrated this. She had probably provided the intel. My emotional collapse was brief, intense. A few days of staring blankly at walls, the full weight of her betrayal crushing me. The woman I loved, the woman I had trusted with my heart, my future, had systematically dismantled me, not just to protect her project, but to silence me entirely. The pain was physical, a tightening in my chest, a constant, dull ache behind my eyes. I felt used, foolish, utterly hollowed out. But then, as the last vestiges of love and hope for us drained away, a cold, clear resolve took root. This wasn't about anger anymore, or even justice in the conventional sense. This was about facts. This was about science. This was about truth. And Veronica Thorne had fundamentally misunderstood one thing about me. You can try to bury an environmental engineer, but you can't bury the data. The data always finds a way to surface. I realized confronting her directly would be useless. She'd deny, she'd gaslight, she'd spin. She'd use her connections to make me look like the crazy, jilted ex. No, my revenge wouldn't be a screaming match. It would be a quiet, precise, scientific detonation. A nuclear option, delivered with the cold impartiality of verifiable truth. I started planning my exit. I found a small, temporary research position out of state, an excuse to be away, to gather my thoughts, to finalize my plans. I told her I needed space, that her accusations had hurt me too deeply. She seemed almost relieved, probably thinking she'd finally gotten rid of the inconvenient scientist. While she celebrated my absence, I meticulously prepared my counterstrike. I went back to the contaminated site, more discreetly this time, and took fresh samples. I knew her team had done a superficial cleanup to satisfy some low-level regulatory checks, but I suspected they hadn't done the deep, extensive remediation required. I needed something irrefutable, something that couldn't be spun or denied. I remembered an obscure, specialized testing method from my university days, one that measured minute-specific biochemical markers that would indicate long-term exposure of subsurface microbes to those particular contaminants. It wasn't a standard test, which made it harder to falsify on a large scale, but it was legally recognized and highly sensitive. I leveraged my old network, reaching out to former professors and trusted colleagues at other universities, all of whom still valued scientific integrity above all else. I explained my need for a very specific, independent analysis, without revealing the full extent of my personal ordeal. They came through. The results, when they came back, were exactly what I needed: undeniable, precise, and catastrophic for Veronica's project. The markers were there, in concentrations that indicated systemic, ongoing contamination. My final step was to prepare a meticulously documented, anonymous report. I created a robust data visualization package, open source and easily verifiable by any independent lab. It detailed the type of contaminants, their likely origin, and, crucially, how Veronica's project design, with its deep foundations and planned dewatering, would inevitably spread these poisons into the local aquifer and surrounding neighborhoods. I didn't mention Veronica by name once. I didn't need to. The scientific facts would speak for themselves. I packaged it all up, ready to drop the hammer. The groundbreaking ceremony for Veronica's Thorn Towers was a lavish affair, broadcast on local news, attended by politicians and city officials. I was far away, watching the live stream, a cold knot in my stomach. As she stood there, shovel in hand, beaming for the cameras, my finger hovered over the send button. Then I hit it. The report, complete with its open-source data and visualizations, went out to a carefully curated list, a coalition of local environmental journalists, a prominent consumer advocacy group, and a few key municipal water authorities who I knew valued integrity. The silence lasted less than 24 hours. Then, the storm broke. The first article, then another, then an expose on local TV news. The raw data, presented so clearly, so undeniably, sparked an immediate outcry. Independent labs, spurred by the media reports, began their own testing. Their results corroborated mine, precisely. The scientific consensus against Thorn Towers became overwhelming. Protests erupted. The project was halted permanently. The political connections Veronica had so carefully cultivated evaporated as fast as a spilled chemical on a hot asphalt. An investigation began, not just into the contamination, but into how the initial environmental reports had been so misleading. Veronica's empire crumbled, exposed by the very thing she tried to bury: truth. Her name became synonymous with corporate greed and environmental negligence. The public health scandal was immense, and her carefully constructed reputation, her legacy, was shattered. Quietly, without fanfare, as the focus shifted to Veronica's downfall, my name was cleared. The ethics committee, having reviewed the detailed evidence I'd submitted anonymously to them as well, retracted their inquiry and subtly acknowledged the falsified nature of the accusations against me. My funding was reinstated, my old contacts reached out, apologetic. But I wasn't going back to that life. The experience had changed me fundamentally. The ambition that had once burned brightly in Veronica's eyes, I now saw for what it was: a destructive, selfish force. My own ambition had shifted. I left Denver, temporarily, and found myself drawn to grassroots environmental groups, lending my expertise to communities fighting for clean water against powerful, uncaring corporations. I advised, I taught, I shared my knowledge. I found purpose in protecting the vulnerable, not chasing accolades or status. My Subaru still runs, and I still live modestly. The scars are there, deep beneath the surface, a constant reminder of how easily one can be blinded, how profoundly one can be betrayed. But they are healing. A few months ago, I met Sarah. She's an urban planner, passionate about creating sustainable, livable cities. We connected over shared values, over long walks discussing stormwater management and community gardens, not penthouse parties and luxury condos. She's quiet, observant, and she looks at me, really sees me, not for what I do or what I have, but for who I am. She laughs at my jokes, not at my work. She talks about integrity, about making a difference, not about making a fortune. And when I tell her about my days, about the endless battle for clean water, She listens with genuine interest, her hand warm in mine, and a shared understanding in her eyes. The peace I feel now, watching the sunset, is real. It's not the calm before a storm. It's the quiet after the war and the slow, steady hum of life, finally, truly, moving forward.